And go.
Welcome to the Political Paradigm Shift Podcast, episode 8. So today we're going to be talking about the trajectory of the Republican Party and which direction it's going to be moving in, depending on whether or not Trump wins re-election. So we're going to make a distinction between whether he wins or loses. But first, we're going to do some current events, and we'll start off with Chuck, and then we will move around. So, Chuck, you're up first.
Okay, this should be interesting. The notification just now said my internet connection is unstable, much like me, I suppose. But anyway, no, today, I just been bumming again. COVID-19 now apparently is going to take the 2021 college football, or 2020 college football season with it. And I'm a football guy. My high school season for the team I help coach has already been whacked. And now college football, which is my number one passion in sports, looks like it's going to be gone as well. And it's just, I don't know, this must be what depressed feels like. I mean, clinical depression, because God knows, that's part of the rhythm of life for me in the fall is getting the kids ready for our game on Friday night, and then relaxing with the college football on Saturday. And by then, we're breaking down film for our game the next Friday night. And it's all part of that wonderful rhythm that we get into in the fall. And now it's going to be unavailable. And I can only imagine how bad off I'm going to be when fall actually gets here and there's no damn football. I don't know. That's just, obviously, hopefully this will be the worst of it, but man, this is tough. It's tougher than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I hear you. So college football is going to be canceled? Whose phone is
That's the most likely scenario. Yeah, the Big Ten announced today, the conference presidents announced today that they were going to forego the fall sports season. Now, that includes Michigan and Ohio State, and apparently from their fan base, there's a big pushback against that for obvious reasons. But, if a major conference like the Big Ten is going to call it quits, then I can't see how the other ones are going to be able to follow through. Plus, let's be honest, let's say they do proceed with football, and the first time 2 or 3 players test positive, everyone's going to go ape shit and crap all over themselves. And insist they shut it all down, irrespective of its survivability rate. So again, if they do start, all it's going to take is just a couple of positive tests for people to throw the kibosh on this. So anyway, it's probably beating it.
Do you think they should play? What's your position?
No, selfishly, I would like for them to, but I understand them trying to protect themselves from liability. Plus, for those college campuses that are not having kids back, there's no way you can not have the students back and justify playing football. I understand that. And if they do play, again, I think it would be just the slightest bit of positive testing would shut it all down anyway. So I understand it. I don't have to like it, and I sure as hell don't like it. But that's the world, unfortunately, we're living in.
See, that's starkly different than people trying to say that you don't approve of all of these shutdowns or anything like that. You complaining about it is one thing. You not agreeing with it and pushing for the opposite is a completely different thing. So I just want our viewers to hear that that's not Chuck. And they need to stop misrepresenting because it bothers me.
Yeah, again, there's one thing, and I've been very consistent in that I am wary of the people who have the shutdown mentality, who want to have everybody stay in their homes or whatever. I think that's taking it too far. But I do understand, again, COVID-19 is a thing. It's a bad thing. It's very bad. I don't agree with those who are treating it as though it's the Black Death. And I'm not willing to give up long-term the things that make us human. Going to a concert, going to a movie, going to a football game, playing football, hanging out with your friends at a restaurant.
Yeah, you agree that temporary restrictions are appropriate, though?
It depends upon which restrictions we're talking about. And again, I understand a lot of what's fueling this is the desire to stay out of the courtroom, not be sued for neglect or anything. So I certainly understand it from that standpoint. Um, my issue is when the government gets involved. Now, if the college presidents decide they don't think football is a good idea, that's one thing. If the government, if the federal government were to say, no, you can't do this because, that's, I would have a problem with that, yes.
Gotcha. What about state governments and local governments?
Same thing. I think it should be up to the universities.
So what would you, can you give me an example? And I'm just asking because I'm interested in your position on this.
Sure.
Can you give me an example of what you see as being like an extreme overreaction, something that you're just outraged by, like a policy that
Hmm.
COVID?
I'm most outraged by the policies that make no sense, that seem to be policies in place just because we can do this. I keep going back to the one that Governor Whitmer put in Michigan, where you could buy most commodities, but you could not buy plant seeds. What the fuck is up with that?
Yeah, what was
And,
the
and, and
rationale?
again, there were several commodities that were in there that you could not buy, and there was no reason given other than the fact that this woman thought she could do it. I mean, when you asked her about it, she made fun of you. She tried to pass the buck, saying, well, it's not that big a deal anyway. It's not planting season. Well, that's not the fucking idea. It's the idea that you've arbitrarily said something is illegal, and you're not giving us a good explanation as to why that is. That's infuriating to me.
So Governor Whitmer is the governor of Michigan.
Of Michigan, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. You couldn't buy paint either, I think. Paint.
Yeah. Just, I mean, no reason whatsoever.
It was bizarre.
Those are the ones that tick me off the most.
Wasn't it just where you could buy those things that was the issue? It wasn't the things on the list, but it was the where, because she was trying to limit large groups of people from gathering.
Yeah, and I think they mostly apply to the big box retailers,
That's what I
Target, what have you. But to me,
But
the thought that
there's a
people buying plant seeds is somehow going to make Target more crowded than if they're buying lawn fertilizer or something. It makes
Right.
no sense
Okay,
whatsoever.
so I understand that, because even in California, there was a time when you'd go into the retail store and all the clothing areas were like blocked off, taped off, closed down. You still can't go in the clean rooms in most of them. So
Which is weird. I mean, I'm already here. I mean, just.
I mean, if anything, buy all the seeds you can and grow at home and stop going to the damn store, right?
Right, exactly. I get most frustrated at government that is inefficient, but government that does something just because they can do something. To me, that's the most odious function of government, is just because they can restrict, they do restrict. And for no good reason that I can tell. And when you ask them why, as was the case in Michigan, Whitmer was infamous for laughing it off or refusing to answer the question at all. That's arrogance, that's hubris. And boy, if you want to piss me off, that's a good way to do it.
So can I go next?
Yeah, of course.
Because I'm already yapping and it got my brain triggered over something that happened in Ventura this past week. So I go walking at the beach like 5 days a week, except for now I'm back at work and I haven't been able to figure out how to get it back on my schedule. But so I go, we keep socially distanced. I go with my mom, we wear a face mask, yada, yada. Over the weekend, a bunch of different places in California, and I don't know if this happened all the way down south or all the way up north, but at least around here, people were gathering to protest about churches. And so now on August 17th, my birthday, they're supposed to go and protest and all show up to the churches and congregate together because they're tired of them being closed down. And so at the beach, you couldn't even go for your walk over the weekend without running into people. That's how packed it was with people protesting for this. So I just wanted to say, I guess, an opinion about that. I'm not that religious to begin with, but I understand and want people's religious rights protected. And I do think that they should have a right to worship. But I find it really difficult to believe that you have to be inside a specific building in order to have church. And especially here in Ventura, where it's super beautiful outside, like every day, why you can't just hold it outside. We've seen them at our parks around here, and it's so cute. They put little flags 6 feet apart, you know, and then everybody brings their face mask and their families in a blanket, and they all sit on the grass and they have church. It's great. So I don't exactly
Can I
understand.
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I will mention this, and again, it goes back to what I say. Yes, if the people at the church make the decision to have that meeting outside, go for it. The government telling them they cannot, that's the bonus round. That's where we get into a whole different level of discussion. In Nevada, they're having the issue with churches not being able to meet with 50 people, but casinos are allowed to operate with really no restrictions on people. You can't logically explain that. You cannot explain that in a way that it makes
I know. Our whole country's all over the place and it's ridiculous.
Well, I mean,
sense, except that we're, yeah. Go. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, you froze for a second, Chuck. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just, again, in Nevada, they are having the issue of explaining why casinos are allowed to open with very few restrictions and churches are not. There's no way you can logically explain that except I'm the government and I can do that, and ain't a damn thing you can do to stop me. Again, that's not right. Anytime you start to insert government restrictions on something, you've got to have a good reason. You've got to sell me or we the people on that, and not do it in a cavalier style that just says, "Yeah, that's the rules. What the fuck you gonna do about it?" No, I don't.
Right.
I don't get off on that at all.
so my question is, you have these people protesting, whatever. So did you have an issue with them protesting?
No, but of course I have an issue with them not wearing face masks and observing the need to not gather in tight groups and just sort of disperse in the area. It was outside, so that's a plus. I mean, I joined some of the Black Lives Matter protests that happened out here.
That was my
And
question.
and on the large, I think out of the thousands of people that came, I saw maybe 3 people without a mask, one of who was a kid from my kid's high school who's like this mad Trumper, and he shows up with no mask and his boots, and he's draped himself in a "Don't Tread on Me" flag, and he's marching with BLM and everybody else just to stick it to him, you know, sticking it to the libs. He thought he was funny. I heard tons of annoying stories about that kid throughout the last school year, but no, it doesn't bother me that they protest for what they want. In fact, I believed in the reopen protests as well. Like what I said for you, Chuck, at the beginning of this, that I think people misinterpret your message and your beliefs and your feelings on things. I think that people tend to do that with me or other liberals as well, because it wasn't the substance of the reopen protest that bothered me. It was the manner in which other idiots were joining it, and it was all mixed up, and I don't think that those people belong there. And I do think that people should have followed science and worn the masks and socially distanced and just done it in a smart manner. So, yeah.
Okay. I mean, just to throw it out there, I've seen lots and lots of videos of lots and lots of BLM protests, or supposedly BLM protests with people not.
Right. Yeah, supposedly too.
Right. So just throwing that out there. Art, did you have a topic?
Well, we learned something interesting today, and I'm just going to jump in and read it from you. This is from our president. And he said, the closest thing is in 1917, they say the great pandemic, and it certainly was a terrible thing, where they lost anywhere from 50 to 100 million people, probably ended the Second World War. All the soldiers were sick.
When did he say that? He said that today?
He said that today. So, and I'm going to generously say that he probably meant the First World War. Yeah, I mean, he said World War II, which, you know, again, we're all told to worry about Biden's brain, but like, this is just a normal sentence for Trump, where he not only is the grammar mangled, but the facts are mangled. It's just a weird jumble of stuff. So I am going to jump in and say that he weirdly has something approximating a point. So World War I ran from basically 1914 to 1918. They stopped fighting and they signed the armistice in 1919. But they were done fighting in 1918. The Spanish flu was basically from 1918 to 1920. So it didn't really hit And they think that a lot of it came through American troop transports who were just bringing people packed together in over
That's
this.
what I've read too.
Yeah, and so this is a commonly believed and understood thing. And the Americans, us, were actually pretty good organizationally because we were fresh and had just arrived of isolating flu cases, moving them aside. We had specialty hospitals for it, and we would rotate people out, isolate them, get them healthy, and then get them back into the fight. The Germans, on the other hand, were at the tail end of 4 years of pretty intense fighting. Their logistics had worn down. They didn't really have the ability to move people around like we did. And the flu actually hit them harder. So, there is actually a pretty good argument to be made that the flu was kind of one of the last straws as far as them just being like, you know what, like it likely did shorten the war a little bit. And that's a tried and true U.S. Army tactic, is to go to exciting new lands and bring diseases they don't have immunity for. So you have to figure that in a weird abstract way, I'm actually going to give Trump like half credit on this one, because assuming he meant World War I, and assuming he didn't literally mean literally, but in like the broader sense, there was widespread illness that was hitting a very heavily taxed German logistic and medical supply system. At a point where they had already been at war for years, they knew they were slowly losing. And at that point, it's probably one of the contributing factors that made them say, okay, we're done. We're done. So anyway,
Sorry,
that was just...
What was his point, though? Why was he referencing that?
Oh, why was he going there at all?
Yeah.
He was just, who knows, just a
He
tangent.
was just going off on some sort of...
It was a tangent about COVID and just... what neurons were firing in his brain that made him want to go in that direction. It had nothing to do with the question, which was just broadly about COVID. So, but what was great is it was this unforced error of saying that it was World War II, which is what everybody's laughing about right now, because obviously he's way off on his timelines. And no Spanish flu during World War II or any major outbreak of the sort. So again, it's just an interesting historical point that I'll maybe quarter credit, third credit, whatever, but he had something approximating a point in there, but had just managed to mangle everything else around it to the point where you just are like...
I feel like lots of times somebody tells him something and he like regurgitates that information randomly, and it always comes out in this really screwed up way, but somewhere in there's some logic, right?
Yeah, well, I think that
negative truth somewhere.
Yeah, no, you're right. He's surrounded by smart people all day, and he probably hears a lot of intelligent things, and then we'll just like toss it out. But like you or I would have this like thing in our brain that we catch, and we'd be like, oh, but if I say that and I don't know what to talk about, I'm going to sound like a child that saw part of a movie and then just like repeating some lines, but nobody knows the context. You know what I mean? Like I know when I don't know what I'm talking about, and if I'm going to say it in front of a lot of people, I'll be like, well, so we're going to like inject disinfectant into my body. And there actually is like a medical, procedure that I guess it's in development that they're talking about, some, different stuff, that there is an actual intelligent like background.
Right, which was the defense of him saying that.
Well, yeah, and the defense is exactly what you're saying, is that he overhears smart people talking and he will say stuff. But unlike you or I, who would be like, I don't know enough to speak about this intelligently, I'm going to sound like a moron. He doesn't have that in his brain. So he'll just say things and he'll sound like a moron, and he doesn't seem to realize it, or it doesn't seem to like cause him to learn a lesson to not do it again.
Did you watch the video that Nick had just sent us to watch? Because one of the commentators on there, Nick, actually said that the fact that he does this as seen as the strength, that he could be completely wrong about something super simple that the entire world seems to know about, and where it would be super embarrassing for one person to have to like get up and walk out.
Yeah.
He stays like it's a strength of his to just stay like, okay, I said something wrong. And, like how, I don't understand how it's a strength. I look at him like an idiot. I'm sure plenty of people do.
It had to do with TPP, and he thought China was involved.
Yes.
Rand Paul.
Yes, exactly.
At one of the debates. And
right.
For anybody else, that would have been a humiliating moment, because it's sort of like common knowledge among political elites. But he sort of just didn't care, and he just continued to go on with his day.
But they said it was a strength of his, and I found that really...
No, it is. If you have like if you have a refrigerator like temperature IQ, then if you see somebody that says things and doesn't apologize and doesn't back down, then there are people who are conditioned to not like they don't register and they don't recognize that that person is lying. Like they look at that person and like,
you just
like,
filled our entire YouTube feed with Ed.
oh,
I'm gonna hear it for the
We
next.
know he's going to be watching this. Everyone say hi, Ed.
hi Ed, what's up? Yeah, I'm sorry Nick can't handle honest debate. So, but yeah, no, there's people who, if they don't see you register that you are lying or that you seem to feel ashamed or chastened or guilty or anything, like if they don't see the body language, they assume that you believe what you're saying and that
That's a
you
very good
are
point.
telling
Yeah.
the truth. No, there's a
Yeah,
lot of
that's
people
very
who
good.
they don't realize this, but they go mostly off of body language. And when you don't change your tonality or your physical appearance or in any way register that you have said something ridiculous, which Trump does all the time, like you were just saying, he'll say the most ridiculous stuff and just stand there like.
It's an interesting point, right?
Yeah.
But this is why
He
it drives
has
people
no
crazy.
self-doubt. It's all confidence. He's just.
It's all confidence. It's just
Right.
all confidence, and
It's just
it
powerful.
is a superpower with people who are naturally suckers. Like if you're a mark and you're just used to getting taken, and people call up and they're like, "Hey, you owe the IRS all this money, so we need iTunes cards. Go to the store and it's like, send me iTunes cards and Bitcoin, and then we won't call the FBI."
This
And
is
then
a great,
people,
yeah, this is a great segue into our topic.
yes, all right. So
And
anyway, bye Ed.
and our topic is where the direction that the Republican Party is going. And so, like I said before, we're going to be making a distinction. So, in one scenario is if Trump ends up winning, God help us. Hopefully, he does not. But if he ends up winning, what happens to the Republican Party? And the other is if he loses, what happens? I think one thing we can all agree on, probably, is that whether he would, there's probably a big difference between how the Republican Party evolves for the next 4 to 8 years, if he wins or if he loses. So I guess we could start with Chuck again. So what do you think, buddy?
To me, Trump is a singular entity. He is unlike, and again, it says my internet connection is unstable, so bear with me here. To me, he is a singular entity insofar as it would be impossible or unadvisable for a party to hitch their wagon to a one-time phenomenon like Trump. I've said it before, Trump is basically the collective anger of people who for many years got tired of what they saw as bad treatment by media elites, political elites, or whatever. People elected Trump mainly because he echoed a lot of them, not because they wanted to echo Trump necessarily. So yeah, if the Republicans want to find Trump 2 or whatever, or if singular Republicans are running on, hey, I'm just like Trump, then I think they're going to be in trouble. I think Trump is a singular phenomenon, and there are a few things sadder than watching a politician trying to out-Trump Trump. It's not going to happen. And like you said, with him, saying something outlandish and just sitting there, what you going to do about it? Yeah, I mean, not everyone is as shameless as him. You can't get away with that. He can. And I've made peace with the fact a long time ago, this is the way it's going to be. Remember how we were so quaintly wondering about the Trump pivot after he got elected? That sure as hell didn't happen. He is what he is. And that's, I don't think you can duplicate that. And if you're a Republican counting on duplicating that to win future elections, you are in trouble. Even if he does manage to win in 2020, I can't imagine a situation where the Democrats will lose control of the House, and they may still very well take over the Senate. And if that happens, again, we'll have divided government. And I think, again, that's the best scenario right now. But if Trump loses, then I think the repercussions for Republicans are going to be felt for many, many years to come, simply because far too many people are equating Trump with conservatism. Number one, Trump is not conservative. He's not remotely conservative. But people are equating him with conservatism. And long term, that's my phone. Sorry about that. Long term, that's a bad thing because he has absolutely nothing to do with conservatism. And for people who are actually conservative, having to explain away Trump is going to get old, and it already is old to me. I mean, God knows how many times have in one of these damn Facebook groups, do I make a point and somebody says, "Hey, Trump humper, what do you think about that?" You stupid son of a bitch, I don't like Trump. God knows, can't you figure it out? But again, they automatically equate conservative stances with the love of Trump. That's what Republicans are going to have to put up with for many, many years.
But don't you think that there has been some fundamental changes just in the Republican agenda? Like there's certainly a more immigration restrictionist support for that. There's trade restriction, stuff like that, economics.
It's been interesting to watch the Republican Party, again, in the aggregate, kind of dip their toes into following Trump, not on everything, but I mean, they realize that he has, quite a bit of popularity, obviously, and they don't want to completely disassociate themselves, but at the same time, they don't want to completely hitch their wagon to him either. It's been a very careful approach, I think, at large by the Republicans.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, besides his personality, which obviously Republicans like, Republican supporters, there are some policy positions that he's advocated for, right, that resonated really well with the Republican base, and is a main reason why he did so well, right, in the primary. The things that he said about immigration, the things that he said about Muslims, stuff like that.
About trade.
Oh, yeah, I mean, again,
populist ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Very populist. Right now, I'm going to do this right now. And again, people elected Trump because he echoed a lot of them, not because they want to. And again, I think he was the result of collective anger on the parts of a lot of people. And as to whether that can be duplicated, I don't think it can. But yeah, I mean, certainly the Republicans are, glomming onto some parts of that agenda simply because, number one, it's popular, and number two, they don't want to completely disassociate themselves from Trump. But long term, for people who fancy themselves conservatives, they're going to have a hell of a time separating themselves from Trump, even though it is absurd to consider Trump to be anything remotely conservative.
Gotcha. So, Art, I have a question for you. I think it's a pretty obvious question. But just wondering your position on it. So the base of support for the Republican Party, would you say that's changed over the past 4 to 8 years?
The base
who they are.
I don't think who they are.
Demographic. The demographic.
No.
You don't?
I don't think.
You don't think it's gone from a. What about like with suburban voters?
Oh well, I think that you have a change in that there are some voters who have moved away from the GOP. Like when Trump says that he's got 96 support of the Republicans, that's probably true in a sense, but that's because the GOP has shrunk. So he does have a incredibly hardcore base, but I think that those people were Republicans before and they'll continue to be Republicans. It's just the spectrum of who Republicans are is narrowed a bit.
Okay. All right. Just a question.
Like,
so
were you asking like is this new influx of like Hispanic or Black or whatever voters?
I just feel like the demographic's a little bit different. I feel like there's a much wider discrepancy in terms of education, and then obviously the suburban voters, especially with white women who live in suburbs or women generally, has widened substantially. Romney's base, for instance, is significantly different. Well, I don't know about significantly, but there's a lot of distinctions from Trump's base demographically.
I mean, Republicans and Democrats are pretty static these days as far as like who makes up what party. I mean, they can kind of shrink or grow at the margins, but I think that the majority are still going to be your stereotypical white male. Some college, no college, in that bracket, and then it'll kind of expand from there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That probably had more Democrats back in the day. I think that even like old liberal bastions of like unions, you'll probably have unions that politically lean left or support Democrats, let's say, but the union members culturally see themselves as Republicans, so they're out voting against their interests as they do.
But I mean, like in the 90s, I remember Bill Clinton and Al Gore won West Virginia like 2 elections in a row, right? And I mean, that would be unheard of in the era of Trump. I mean, he's going to win West Virginia by like 30 points or something ridiculous. It's like one of his best states. I mean, demographically, it's certainly changed over time, but I think it's even changed in the last 8 years. I just think it's a much different party with much different priorities.
The
Yeah,
union
well,
vote is not reliably Democratic anymore like it was for years. That's why
Right.
West Virginia has changed so much. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, but yeah, you're exactly right. And if you want to get down to like that specific change, so Clinton, NAFTA, all of that, basically you had 12 years of GOP rule from the 80s and early 90s, and the Democrats are just reliably just getting just beaten. And Clinton's strategy was to come in and kind of have a centrist third way, basically republicanism light. And you had this push for like offshoring, globalization, moving factories to Asia, that sort of a thing, that the moneyed interests, the Republicans were like already on board with. Like they were already against labor. They were, they basically had that angle covered. So Clinton's basically like, well, we can't beat them, join them. So economically, they went that angle. And then culturally, it started to, push a little harder on the, let's call it identity politics, which is, when you probably saw that start to take off. So fast forward to today, we've now had, 30 years of both parties economically selling out the country, one party catering kind of to the white clientele and the other party catering to everybody else. So now we really have nothing left other than this like racial division and this kind of animosity that separates us. But economically, the parties are pretty similar. So what Trump did is he actually played to that concern. It was a complete scam. He came in and just helped the rich, lower taxes for the rich. It was basically just a giveaway for rich people. But it's resonated because he was addressing the economic problems in a way that, even somebody like Obama, who, is obviously
Do you think it mattered?
Fantastic.
Do you think his position on trade really actually mattered? Or
I don't think on trade, but he talked a good game about fighting for the little guy and addressing the concerns about getting ripped off. I don't know. I think a lot of his message was intertwined with that.
Okay, but doesn't every presidential candidate say that they're fighting for the little guy? I mean, I don't really feel like that's a huge distinction. I feel like Trump, in particular, resonated with a certain voting bloc because of the way he talked, his shameless behavior. Like, I don't necessarily think people really understand economics all that well. But he said, but the way he said things,
to revive the Southern strategy, in my opinion.
What do you mean?
He seemed to sort of revive.
Well, I mean,
things that we've gone through before in our country, at least twice to my knowledge, where it's sort of come to this head where, you have this working white class who feels the pressure and the weight of the economy. And there's this entire appeal to that subset of Americans.
Yeah, he scapegoated it more effectively.
Yeah, while blaming immigrants and while blaming, these other subsets of Americans. Well, it's all their fault that you're feeling like this. But I mean, this isn't anything new. I feel like this is something that's been done before.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, yes, every politician says they're for the little guy and the working class and the middle class and all that. What was different is that Trump actually named the enemies that these people have been led to believe are the enemy. So like, Mexico, the Mexicans, the Chinese, all these forces out there of people
the media,
with slightly
the Democrats.
The media, the Democrats, the leftists, the college professors, everybody, just, all of the enemies out there that the Reno GOP wouldn't fight. Trump named them and he's like, I'm going to go after them, and basically, did his best. And the base sees that. It's a scam, so it can't work. Even if he built the wall, it wouldn't work. Even nothing he does to China is going to change anything. None of his solutions work, but he's speaking the right language, and people now realize that they've been ripped off. But like you said, nobody understands the economics of these people who are just getting mad and voting. So they get suckered into these ridiculous cultural fights instead. And, we just get mad, but we get no progress.
Yeah,
right.
I think that's a great point on the culture. Okay.
Well, one of the things I said about the media, and I'm sorry, Heather, it's your
No,
turn.
it's
but
fine. I feel like I'm just jumping in on everyone's segment anyways.
Yes. One of the things I've said for years about the mainstream media, as they have moved a little bit further to the left, and I think they have in many ways abandoned their post as the fourth estate. As they did that, they created this yawning vacuum over here that was filled quite gleefully by Fox News. If the media does not move to the left precipitously, then that does not give Fox a place to latch onto. But they saw a market niche there, and thus Fox News and that whole so-called alt news phenomenon began. I think in much the same way as the culture moved a little bit to the left, it created the space for Trump to fall, to take advantage of this group of people who, correctly or incorrectly, saw themselves as being marginalized. He capitalized on it brilliantly, and like I think Art made a good point. He named the enemy. He named them in terms of be it an immigrant or the media, the culture, Hollywood, whatever. He gave a face and a name to the enemy. And in terms of drawing disaffected voters, yeah, that's the way you do it, unfortunately.
It's so amazing to me how the 16 other primary Republican candidates were so disconnected from their base that they couldn't figure that out, right?
Well, that's the design. So if you think about classic GOP hierarchy, you have the Rockefeller Republican, like the country club set, and the idea has always been that you have this kind of game you run where you appeal to, you kind of have what Reagan called the three pillars of conservatism: your military voters, your economic voters, like the big business, and then your evangelicals. And you kind of had this, the Mitt Romney country club set that would figure out how to cater to all of them, and they would run the show. They would say things, and the base, over time, became more and more certain that this was just a bait and switch. Like they would come in and say all this stuff to get elected because that's what GOP politicians did to get elected. And this is why they were all rejected in favor of Trump, is that they're like, but this guy's talking different. Like, he's not doing what Romney did or what McCain did or what Bush did or what all these other guys did, which is to say certain conservative things, and then they get into office, and then we don't get anything better. Like, our lives don't get better, and there's still Mexicans everywhere, and like we don't understand why we're not getting what we want. So that was a gratuitous jab. I'm sorry. But you see what I'm saying with this is that, this was always kind of the plan for the last at least 30 years, if not longer, was to kind of hustle these people in with this, cultured elite, the GOP elitists up top, the rhinos, however you say it. Actually, I always see it in print, alt caps, RINO. I'm not actually sure if it's Rhino or Reno. So here we are, me looking like an idiot on a podcast.
Rhino. It's definitely
Is it Rhino?
Yeah, for sure.
Not Reno? Because I've heard people say Reno.
Are you going to get up and leave the room now?
I always thought it was Rhino.
No,
I mean,
don't go.
I'm kidding. I'm fine.
So my take on all of that is just slightly different, because I feel like this is a strategy that they've used since the Civil Rights Act began, and people sort of needed a home, and someone sort of tuned into the fact that there were all of these Southerners who had plantations and had owned slaves, and they kind of lost their livelihood, and it was sort of funneled into this hate.
That was a while back. You realize that, don't you? It was a while back.
Well, okay,
the whole plantation thing was a while back. Okay.
No, I understand, but my point is that it kind of came to an end as the Depression set in and the Dust Bowl set in, and then boom, we get the New Deal, and then this new sort of conservative called the movement conservatives. You guys heard of that term? Moved in, and they began attacking minorities who wanted handouts. So what I'm trying to say is that this is older than just now, this strategy. They attacked minorities who wanted handouts by the Republican Party, by the way. This was the Republican stance where they wanted to start taxing and funding social. Okay, so that was part of how the weird party switch happened back in that time. But then the movement conservatives sort of came in and were like, no, the minorities are asking for handouts, and we're here to protect the rugged individualism of you, and we want you to be able to go out and do whatever you want with very little government involvement, and just sort of support you along your way. but they did this whole othering back then as well. And they did this whole, let's put a face on who you need to blame as well. And so the Southern strategies were born, and you get Goldwater, Barry Goldwater, and then you get Reagan, who also helped recoin the term "Make America Great Again." And so now we have Trump doing sort of this similar thing, and why you hear a lot of commentators saying things like, this is the last dying breath of the South. This is hopefully like the last time that we see this mess come up again, because what Trump tuned into wasn't just disaffected white voters or disaffected people who feel the pressure of the economic systems. He tapped into something that's been very real for a very long time in our country, that just sort of comes back and then comes back and then comes back. And I'm not so sure.
What is it?
Speaking to what the point of our podcast is, I'm not so sure that it's going to go away just because we get Trump out of office. I think this is a weird thing that our country has done, and possibly other countries around the world do this too, where they do this othering and then they blame, this is the reason for your economic woes, and then they get people bickering with each other. But to say that it's just Trump doing this, I think it was his strategy to be where he is. And if he gets out of office and we get Biden in there, I don't think that his base or that force or that way of manipulating who's to blame for your economic woes is going to go away. I don't think that that's going to be what we need to sort of heal that weird blaming rift that we have in our country. So,
well, nothing unites people better than a common enemy. And if you can identify the enemy and put the face in the name,
war, right?
Exactly. Yeah, there you go.
I'm just kidding. I'm
Problem
just kidding.
solved.
I mean, you would think
Well,
that COVID would have been the thing to unite us, but it hasn't been. And unfortunately, I think all of our othering that Trump has helped stoke, like say with China, is part of the reason why, or just the hating of the government in general is part of the reason why Americans don't trust that the government's putting out, you know, good information for us to follow, so that we would do something like what the Swedish people have done, which is basically follow general, you know, stay apart from each other, wash your hands a lot, don't touch your face kind of thing. But we don't do that here. We're too individualistic.
Well, like in so many other instances where a great calamity, in this case a pandemic, offers us offers a president a great chance to demonstrate leadership skills. This has shown Trump as who he is. He is a divider. He's not a leader. He is a demagogue. Usually somebody like that is the hatchet guy for a political campaign. In years gone by, you wouldn't give a person like Trump political power. You would have them appearing on the talk shows bashing your opponent. You wouldn't have him controlling the levers. But again, tapping into that.
Future. Oh my God. I just had an epiphany. Future candidates are going to have Trump working on his campaign or going out and stumping for them. Oh my God.
Yeah, for those who want to try to latch on to that Trump magic and try to be Trump too, he's going to be doing that for a long time, unfortunately. So I will tell you this factoid though, and again, this is completely anecdotal. The football team I help coach is about 95% African American and always has been. I would say a good third of the people of our players' parents are Trump supporters. That is not an exaggeration. And this idea that Trump is going to get only 1 or 2% of the black vote, I don't think. Again, completely anecdotal, but I would say a good third of the players' parents are Trump supporters. I guess they see him as a rebel, someone who goes against the grain. I don't know, but his support with African Americans is going to be significantly more than most Republicans have had, really since Reagan, I think. So go figure.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Like 15% African American? Do you have a?
Yeah,
I
think he's going to get double digits, which again is quite an achievement for a Republican presidential candidate.
Mm-hmm. Maybe. It's definitely possible.
Yeah, it's odd. I mean, I don't get, again, as to how that affects, the overall vote, the electoral college, that, depends upon where the votes fall. It was the predominantly white Rust Belt states that put Trump over the top last time. And I think that's what's going to cost him this time.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Also, I don't think that the African-American community at large is going to stay home like in 2016. I think they're going to come out in
No.
droves. And I think a lot of people, regardless of what quote unquote community you belong to, are going to come out in droves this time because everybody feels like this is a really intense election cycle.
Well, Trump, again, just as he draws supporters in, he draws opponents in too. He gets a lot of interest from those who do not like him, and it's a double-edged sword to be sure.
So, Art, you never really gave an answer to the question. Where do you see the Republican Party going? You just went off on some art.
Oh, well, I think you've had a random question for me, but if he wins or if he loses?
That's my fault.
Both. Do both.
Well, okay, I mean, if Trump wins, then basically you have the next 4 years, which will be much like the 2020, but a little bit worse every year. And which I know that sounds ridiculous to say, but Trump is getting older. He is getting, and it's hard to imagine having that kind of power when you also have really no character to speak of. So you're going to get these weird situations where he's just going to keep testing limits and being more and more uncontrollable and having an increasingly shrinking pool of people who can actually deal with him. I mean, he's got his immediate family and like this cluster of like clingers on, but even that pool of clingers on has shrunk over 4 years. So like all the generals are gone, all the original like political hacks are gone. Like now he's like on like the fourth string, like just people who literally would be nobody other than they've like have latched onto the power of the United States executive branch.
But that's by choice, though. Like he got rid of people intentionally.
Yeah,
but that doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't support. A lot of them wouldn't support him over, a Democratic opponent. Or
no. What we're saying is that assuming Trump wins, like what you're asking, what the future is going to look like, and what the future is going to look like is you're going to have this increasingly radicalized party that's just like a cult of personality over a guy who's increasingly isolated and then like divorced from reality. So like these Never Trump, Lincoln Project, like all the old school Republicans that are kind of clinging on to see if they can get the party back. Like at some point they're either going to be shaken loose or just rejected. Like you're going to have what you think of as the vestiges of sanity are just going to be tossed out of the party, either voluntarily or just thrown out. And what's going to be left is like your Dan Bonginos, and on the smart end, like your Ben Shapiro's who like, kind of half support him, half don't, but really do. But mostly like you're screaming like Tucker Carlson's, the Bonginos, just the Ingrams, the most like hot-headed Fox News people or, right side media, but just disconnected from like the old school intelligentsia, like all the people who used to inform what the party wanted to be about, philosophically, are going to be gone. And we're going to have 4 years of people basically just contorting themselves to support Trump as he continues to descend down this bizarre, just day-to-day existence of him just fucking with people. And it's going to,
if he wins.
If he wins, yeah. And you're going to have the psychological tension you're feeling now in 2020, but he's just going to keep increasing it because he's just that mentally built to do that. So it will be like this, and you'll have a population that is twisted to go along with that, or twisted to fight against it and driven crazy in the result. So like the stuff you hate about Antifa and cancel culture will get worse. The stuff you hate about the right will get worse. It'll all get worse. So just imagine what we have, and it's just going to be compounded and compounded.
Imagine a Trump who doesn't have to worry about being reelected.
Right. Well, and this is
governor switch on him. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's basically his last act. I mean, he will have, that kind of power when you're president is beyond addicting. I mean, it's the kind of stuff where most people have never wielded anything close to that kind of power. And when you got that and you're basically unstoppable, they can't impeach you, the people aren't going to turn on you. It's going to start pushing the limits of what he can get away with and how blatant he's going to get. And because you do have a good section of the country that, we're way past him killing people in Fifth Avenue and getting away with it. Like, they're dropping them by the hundreds of thousands now. And you've got people who are like, oh yeah, well, let's just end the, payroll tax and I just won't get Social Security, but, fuck the libs. So like you already have a good section of the country that's a lot more radicalized than you realize, and probably a lot more primed to accept quasi wartime conditions to, fight their enemy. So
Okay.
it's just going to twist the country in those ways. And this is if he wins. What it looks like in 2024, like what kind of person is going to try and scramble. At that point, it really will be a Trumpified GOP. And you'll have like the Matt Gaetz, the Tom Cottons, and probably not even like the, what's her name, the Nikki Haley's. Even she was kind of like, she's trying to walk the line. It's still kind of a hustle with her, but it'll be the people who are true believers that will pick up the mantle from there and go. And that's just going to be who the party will be at that point.
I think that's a pretty good prediction. So what if he loses? What happens then?
If he loses, then, I mean, we'll have obviously the weird period before he actually leaves office where, you know, there's going to be, it'll just be the most ridiculous, like drama in U.S. history. Like, you know, there's going to be so much big talk, buckle up, you know, I'm not even going to speculate online as to how stupid it's going to get, because it'll underwhelm you once you get into December and you're just like, where am I living? But once we get to February and all that, and he wanders off to set up Trump TV, and you know that crowd kind of shuffles out, there's going to be a giant reckoning. You're going to have this sense among the GOP and the Republicans that like the end is arrived. Like the Antifa's won, you know, Joe Biden is a puppet, and you're going to have this, the gulags are going to re-educate everybody. You're going to have this crazy vibe through the right that they, and I think that they're going to lose the Senate as well. If not fully, then it might split right down the line to where the VP is casting the deciding vote. But regardless, there's going to be this shockwave through the GOP that like, we're done, like we're doomed. And that's going to be a major reckoning that it's going to cause some of them to go more extreme and some of them to try to go back to the old days. But it's going to be chaos because it will be unresolved. And what's going to change next will be the realization that they're probably going to lose Texas in the next 2 cycles. Possibly not this cycle. I don't think Texas is going to flip this time, but it'll be real close. But 2024, Texas is in doubt. And by 2028, it's a purple state. Like it's just going to be a coin toss every election. So at that point, the GOP will be forced to change, or they're going to live like the Democrats did in the 80s, which is get blown out every time. Just every time get blown out. And until they get tired of losing, and they might not, like you might have these guys who are just on the right, just like, we need to go back to the Trump days and Trump. And that's just going to lose them elections. Like the country's just not white enough to do that anymore as you keep going on and on, which Tucker Carlson was talking about today, about how we need to change the demographic shift or we're done for. So
I was actually just going to say something about him.
Okay.
I hate to lump all of these people together because I think they're really different.
Sure.
So Tucker Carlson and Dan Bongino, whatever his name is, awful human being, are very, very different, right? And I feel like Tucker Carlson is one of the only people, right? They've talked about him as a potential presidential candidate in 2024. I feel like he's one of the only people that could legitimately redirect the Republican Party, not in a completely different direction than Trump, but in to add more of an intellectual foundation to it, and to sort of to change it slightly and still be successful. Like I can see Tucker Carlson winning a presidential election in 2024, and I can see a lot of people who are ardent Trump supporters supporting him in a similar way. So I just think that he's definitely proposed some pretty populist ideas on his show that I feel like are really gaining ground on the right.
Yeah, Tucker Carlson is your kind of I don't want to say any kind of intelligentsia or anything like that, but he's a reasonably intelligent guy who has shifted his hustle a little bit to kind of go with a little bit ahead of the pack. And I think he realizes that the main problem that the working class and the middle class are facing are economically rooted. And he speaks to that, and I don't love his solutions or a lot of his ideas, but he at least has his hands around the problem, which is that the economic situation is going to deteriorate until we find some way to address it. And a lot of what the GOP and Trump, the old GOP and Trump have tried as far as solutions, the whole trickle down supply side economics don't work. And Tucker, to his credit, does realize that you basically have this corporate domination of our political system that will prevent anything from materially changing. So we're going to fight about culture war and, you know, cancel culture and all that, and that will fill our day, but it's not going to change anything. Whether or not there's a cancel culture or who wins it or who loses it, it doesn't matter. Like, he actually does get that. Whereas most of these guys are just like F the libs and, you know, I don't know. For most of them, it's just a hustle, but there are a couple of guys out there who do get the problem in a degree and could have some different directions for it.
I think Tucker Carlson genuinely believes in what he says. I've seen him speak at a lot of different conservative conferences, and he seems pretty authentic when he talks about like suicide rate and the opioid crisis and stuff like that. Like, he's legitimately concerned. My fear about him is he plays the same sort of white identity politics as Trump, but he is much more, I think he's going to be much more effective. And so, like, people talk about the fact that, you know, one of the reasons Trump wasn't so bad is because he's so incompetent and ignorant and everything else. He doesn't understand the system.
I remember that.
Right.
Well, that's
He doesn't
the
understand
saving.
anything.
Yeah,
Tucker
that's the
Carlson
saving grace.
does. Right.
Now, Tucker Carlson also makes $6 million a year working at Fox News. He's got a net worth of about $30 million. So he's actually paid very well to understand or not understand things. So just because somebody seems very sincere, yeah, okay. I mean, you know, for that kind of money, you would be shocked at the kind of shit I could be sincere about. So
well, I can't know for certain that he is
Right.
sincere about what he's saying, but he's pretty consistent. He's pretty knowledgeable. He says things that, you know, like he sort of advocated for Elizabeth Warren's economic plan. Remember that? Yeah. I mean, that isn't necessarily something that you would expect the Fox News audience to support, but he didn't lose any viewers as a result. And, you know, Now,
I just to throw this out there, you also have the Steve Bannon element of, you know, original Trumpism, which was that he did understand that economic angle. And you have these guys, and I know it's a trite over, you know, it's a loaded word, but you have these guys who are essentially fascists in the sense that they see the power of corporation as being a threat to the, you know, what they see as the good of the people, but one that should be harnessed for nationalistic terms. So, and, you know, even in like your, you know, pre-war Germany, you had like a lot of these big industries, which were basically pulled in to serve the needs of the state, to get employment up, to have better benefits. There was this idea that corporate power needed to serve the needs of the masses. And there's probably a right and wrong way to do it, let's say. But certainly what they have in mind is going to look a lot more like one that cares a lot about the color of the people who are getting the benefits. And in that's concern, is that they're not wrong in some of their economic issues that they identify as problems. But I'm super not thrilled about what I believe their actual solutions would be, given how they tend to view things through an ethnic frame.
Right. No, I think that's a great.
And if they could just shed the looking through that ethnic framing, they might actually get many more voters.
Well, that's where that weird crossover with the Bernie people is that they kind of, like, you know, if you know Crystal and Sagar, it's Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty. So they're on the Hill. This is like a false flag program to lure in Bernie people and make them alt-righters. But
who are these people?
So Crystal Ball used to be on Hannity all the time. She ran for Congress. She's a left.
The Hill.
She's on the Hill, yeah. And then Sagar is like the right-wing counterpart. But they basically do this thing where like she kind of platforms Sagar and makes him seem reasonable.
They get along very well. Let's just say that.
Yeah, you know, they do. And it's a left and right show, and they, you know, show both sides, all that. But the point is that Sagar is also against the whole corporate power thing. And, you know, he talks a very similar game to the Bernie people. And they're trying to lure in these Bernie people who are disaffected. But it's kind of like a gateway to seeing things from more of a right-wing perspective of this is how corporations should serve the needs of the state, kind of an angle. And
Right.
it's
I often see the sort of more old school republicanism overlapping with progressive ideals. It's very bizarre, especially if you look back to some of the things that Republicans originally wanted to have passed or do. It really overlaps with a lot of progressive things, and it's really interesting.
well, there was some overlap even from like the, like FDR period where, he was kind of playing footsie with fascism himself a bit. And there was this period. No, well, I mean,
He was.
there was. I mean, it was a thing, and there was a lot of New Deal stuff which could have taken a much different turn, but instead they kind of went a different direction than Europe. But this was all new stuff back then. It's not like there was this long history of fascism to look back on where people realized kind of how it could turn dark. So, there was a strong element of crossover even back then. So it's not necessarily wrong to say, oh, we need to look at these corporate interests and kind of curtail them or bend them to the state or what have you. But there's certainly wrong ways to do it. And when you have the wrong motivations or you're taking a different direction, there's a concern. And I think that's where you look at like what you're talking about with like the Tucker Carlsons or Saga or whoever. There are people on the right who get it, that's Steve Bannon, but those people are actually really dangerous.
Yeah. And there's definitely Bernie people out there who are susceptible to that kind of
because they're weaponized to think that like the DNC is like worse than the Third Reich. So like they're like literally like
I hate them more than the Trump supporters.
100% they hate the DNC more than Trump, and it's just you've lost the script at that point. Like if you're so hard left that you're
No, they're beyond persuasion.
A lot of that, to
Right.
be fair, a lot of that has to do with wanting to have their voices heard in the Democratic Party in 2016 and feeling completely disaffected by just bizarre things that happen with, for instance, the ballots and the polling stations.
When you get screwed out of a nomination, people, you're going to take a dim view of those who screwed you out of a nomination. This isn't rocket science.
Well, so what happened was a lot of us on the ground, a lot of us on the ground were sharing in real time issues that were happening.
Sure.
And to the larger masses of Democrats, it seemed like a bunch of conspiracy nonsense, which is hilarious because now we're completely on the other end of that, watching Trumpers say, oh, look at all of this conspiracy nonsense. And most of us are just like, yeah, you're full of shit. Like, that's not happening. But when 2016 was going on, I was definitely in touch with a lot of crazy things going on. Like there was this in Arizona when all of the polling stations got closed, which was obviously Republicans who did that and not Democrats who did that, but the DNC got blamed for that as well. But they were doing some shenanigans through the fact that those polling stations had been closed. And so people were waiting in line for like 5, 6, 7 hours in the heat. And so Bernie people got together online and were ordering people pizza, delivering water and chairs for the elderly, holding places in line so they could go pee and not lose their spot.
A lot of wasted time and money.
But it really felt like we were in the thick of trying to fight for something that we knew was an uphill battle to begin with. And so that resentment, I understand the resentment. I still hate 2016 if I'm honest. But like I keep saying, I think Trump is a red alert emergency, and so I have to just sort of set that aside for the time being.
That's reasonable. It's reasonable to be, yeah.
But,
go ahead.
But I feel like it's hypocritical of me to say what's that? Chuck, what's that?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's, if I were a Bernie supporter, I would have a very dim view of the DNC these days. God, yes.
Right. So that weird group of otherwise Democratic or progressive voters refuses to have anything to do with the DNC, which is interesting. Well, so because Bernie is a populist candidate, Trump is a populist candidate, and we're wondering what's going to happen if Trump is no longer there, but that base still exists. Look at what happened to a large portion of Bernie voters who now refuse to do anything for the Democrats unless it's for a progressive. And there's these constant, I don't know if you guys know what's going on with all of the Bernie delegates right now. They're all going to refuse to vote for the platform when they show up for the convention and everything. There's a lot of protesting still going on and infighting still going on between progressives and regular Democrats. So I assume that something similar is going to happen on the right. I am hoping, and it's so ridiculous for me to say this because I am farther left and a progressive, but I'm really hoping that we get more of the Mitt Romney types back into the Republican Party and in control of things. There's some really interesting things going on. Orrin Cass has American Compass, which has to do with Republicans, again, looking to making sure the government is at least equal to all people when they delegate legislation, not necessarily big government, Chuck. I'm afraid to say that in front of you, but but like policies, like for instance, with all of our trading and stuff, and how we outsourced all of our jobs, you know, all around the world, but trying to ensure that these major companies aren't saving a buck because they're getting kids in sweatshops to make their products. I mean, there's something that goes against the moral grains of our society as Americans that says, hey, that's not okay. And so we have to have some sort of government oversight for that. And so people like Orrin Cass, I was listening to some of his podcasts, talk about wanting to get back to those types of idealism in the Republican Party. And I would love to see the Republican Party get back to something like that, because that makes way more sense, just being an American, as opposed to this craziness that Trump's got going on.
Yeah. So who is Orrin? What's his name? Orrin Cass?
Orrin Cass. He has this. It's called American Compass. It's sort of brand new and it just started this year. But I suggest looking into it. I'll post some things when we get this posted. I'll post some things in the comments.
What kind of, is he a populist, right-wing Republican, something? You don't know? What kind of policies does he
not a
support?
populist. No.
Not as populist.
He was going to be on Mitt Romney's
okay.
Administration when Romney was running, and so yeah, so it would be like, what do we call that? Romney politics? I don't know what you call it. Is there
Romney
like
had some pretty
term?
Pretty right-wing policies that he supported. I mean, he was
severely conservative.
Absolutely, yes, but he also had other ones.
Yeah.
And,
right.
yeah.
Okay. Well, so we are coming to the end of the show. Does anybody have anything left to say? Art, do you have anything left to say?
I am good, but thank you.
Chuck,
I'll close out with this, my perpetual wish that we would take the teeth out of government as much as we possibly can. That way it doesn't make a fuck who wins these damn things. But that'll never happen, will it?
Not if Art gets his way.
This is true. You all be re-educated to serve.
There you go.
No, I don't. I think that's an interesting topic for another time. And I don't actually necessarily disagree. I just think we need to change some structures up to make sure that it worked for everybody.
Yeah. Right.
No, I think that we really could reduce the power of government and reduce what it can do and what it's authorized to do, because we've
By
now
giving
weaponized
them control over everything.
Well, we have this system now where it's this kind of zero-sum winner-take-all. People feel like they're facing extinction.
Yeah.
And at the end of the Obama era, there was this sense among the right that they were kind of doomed, that they were just going to get rolled by these Republicans, and like the left was ascendant, and it was just kind of like the end. Hillary was going to take over. There's nothing to be done to stop her. And Trump kind of charged in and just grabbed that desperation and fought back. And if Trump wins again, that's going to happen on the left in 2024. And you're going to get somebody who is a left-wing version of Trump, but not incompetent. And it's going to be, like shit you ain't never seen. So I don't think that we have a interest in having our fights this bitter, this divided, with the stakes this high every 4 years. Eventually, there's no equilibrium. The system's going to tear itself apart. So I definitely think that we need to lower the stakes for victory every time, because otherwise it's just a game theory, death spiral where it's going to loop us into having to destroy each other because we can't risk losing.
I agree.
Right now, yeah, we've vested so much power in government now that there is everyone has an interest in winning now. And if your tribe loses, there are very real things that will happen to you. It's not just theory. I mean, it's actual things will happen to you because we have given government more and more control over the past few generations over seemingly mundane day-to-day things. And if they did not have that authority, then it would not be a blood sport to determine who wins this quadrennial porn contest, that revenge porn contest that we call a presidential election.
I think we have a topic for next week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Real quick, before we go.
Yeah.
VP picks. I know we've talked about this before. Who do you think is going to be the VP pick? Chuck.
Don't give a shit.
All right. Chuck doesn't give a shit. Art.
I mean, I feel like it's going to be Harris only because at this point it's just weird. Like there's no other real indication that there's anybody left. I don't know. It might be something totally out of left field, but it's too big a secret to keep. Like I think that the stuff that the inner circle has been discussing would have leaked out by now if it wasn't this narrow range of people that we were legitimately looking at. I mean, he could just go total dark horse, Sarah Palin out of. I mean, obviously, you know,
No,
not literally, but like what McCain did, he threw a Hail Mary. I mean, he was going to lose, so he's like,
that was a terrible decision.
But but he was going to lose, so that's when you throw Hail Marys. Yeah, he got picked, and then it was an embarrassment, but sometimes that's all you got. So Biden, on the other hand, doesn't have that. So it'll be weird if he throws a Hail Mary. So that's why I'm kind of like, he's kind of a conventional wisdom guy. Like he's done everything by the numbers. He won the primary by not really doing anything and not playing any silly games. Just like,
he was the safest Democratic candidate. So it makes sense he's going to pick the safest vice presidential candidate.
Exactly. So
But we all think it's going to be an African-American woman.
Oh, he's pretty much said that. Yeah.
And they're going to be ambitious.
Yeah, they will.
Is that word?
Yes, they will. Yes, they will.
I'm totally kidding.
Let me just say, as a woman, that's not offensive to me because I absolutely have ambitions. I think everybody does, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It tends to be used in like business circles as, oh, she's ambitious, insinuating that she's going to sleep her way to the top. But
right.
Oh, you froze, Heather.
Yeah.
Froze.
Oh, wow. All right, that's how you make an exit right there. She's got the hand up. Just
yeah.
You froze.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
Was I supposed to repeat it? I don't know what you missed, so I'm just gonna stop.
Okay. We got the idea.
Yeah.
I'll also say Harris, by the way. I think Kamala Harris is gonna be the pick.
I'm gonna be really disappointed if it's her. I just hate her so much.
She's actually, and obviously everyone's going to hate this, but has done a lot to cultivate all of the old Clinton donors and those old power structures and really getting good with the Clinton family. And she also was in really good with Beau Biden. So it was a bad play on her part to try and stick him the way she did with that little girl was me. Like that.
But that's going to be used against them. Like 80 million times.
I mean,
how are you going to be the vice president to somebody that you're accusing of being a racist?
Oh, well, that's the same. It's the same way that the entire GOP got behind Trump right after trying to like stick him with as well. So this is politics. Nobody cares. It's just the problem here is that Biden did care and it did offend him. And there's some stuff you can chalk up to politics is a rough sport, but when you actually personally offend the other person and not in like a ha-ha way, but like you actually get under their skin and twist a knife kind of a thing. He takes that very seriously. So, she'd probably already be the nominee. He would have been over it by now if she hadn't quite gone that far. So.
Okay.
But who knows? I mean, that's when you're ambitious, you just do shit. So I don't know.
I mean, she is just so ambitious.
There's a lot of ambition there.
A lot of female politicians are ambitious.
Yeah.
Jesus, you're gonna get it.
I can't.
Make sure your wife watches this. That's all I have to say.
So for those of you watching at home, this was a debate we were having earlier, and that we were saying that my point, because I'm a ridiculous soy boy cucked lib, is the term ambition is not brought up with a male politician or like business person. It's just assumed that, well, yeah, like, you know, of course he's ambitious, like he's trying to win. Whereas if you see like a female who's working her way up the chain, you're like, oh yeah, look, good for her. She's very ambitious. Like, good stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a weird gender thing that you just
right, or it's
you know,
used as a negative,
or especially as a negative, we're like, oh well, she is kind of ambitious,
Right, yeah.
so
Yeah, right.
whatever it takes, whatever it takes.
but it's not
So-
true that other politicians aren't described that way. I think Ted Cruz was described that way many times as an ambitious politician.
And, I mean, Ted Cruz would also sleep his way to the top if anyone would, let that happen. So
He's ambitious.
He-
the problem isn't that
he doesn't
you're
really
not
have the
right.
merchandise to make that.
He's got it. Yeah, it takes
The
two to
problem
tango.
isn't that you're not right, but there's got to be another way of describing a female candidate if you can't use the word ambitious, because it's still a character trait that people have.
Yeah, it's just not
So-
typically used with men.
Right.
But the right in particular, and I'm sorry to say this, is going to find all sorts of terms that can easily be used to be derogative or to put a woman down. It's just going to happen just because she's a woman. And whoever it is really needs to have, some plates of steel.
I'm going to run an experiment real quick. I'm going to Google the words Jeb Bush and ambition. Or let's say ambitious. So, all right. So $1.3 million or 1.3 million results. And then let's do Hillary Clinton.
Well, she's going to have way more because she's more popular.
Good God. Yes. That's 4 times the amount of results.
Now do Trump.
Okay, let's do Donald
Oh,
Trump.
this
Oh,
is
God.
fun.
And then do Obama.
This every time.
All right. Point taken.
All
I
right.
win. You're not saying it. Okay.
Yeah. All right. No, it's for Donald Trump. Donald Trump's been a public figure for many years. So yes, he had like
What
10
was
million.
Hillary Clinton?
She was around 4 million,
And what was Trump at?
about 10.
Okay. Hillary Clinton's been in politics since 1992. And before that, I'm sorry, 1980s.
Yeah, but he's not been like a public like business figure. Like Trump is a brand that extends into the 80s and arguably before that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, right. I think it's more connected to their name recognition than the word ambitious. Talk about an inexact
it is.
position. Okay.
Thanks for the rabbit hole, guys.
I know. It's what we do.
So next week, we're going to be talking about the role of government in politics. Exciting stuff, right, guys?
And it'll be a class on how to end a podcast on time.
No.
We
Yes.
can't do that. We can't do that.
We should all just sing a song and roll the credits. Or something.
Oh, we need that music that starts off soft and goes louder and louder and plays us off.
That's right. All right, guys. I appreciate everybody coming, and I will talk to you on Facebook.
Okay.
All right.
Wait, one more thing really quick.
Asshole. Bye, guys. Have a good night.
Bye.
Take care, guys.
See you.